All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records. I believe it's episode 16. We'll see. I haven't shot a video in a while. A few months ago, my wife was out of town, and I just used that time to shoot a whole run of videos and have just been kind of doling them out since. Didn't film last week because I had a weird thing with my shoulder, and it's better. It's not 100%, but it's better. But it really was miserable, and I was just kind of too like reaching down and grabbing records would have been painful, and I would have been whinging about it the entire time. So, but anyway, today we are doing something that hopefully you'll find interesting. It is the Rolling Stones, 1965 to 1967. We'll see how long this takes. It might wind up being two videos. Who knows? But this is what I have always called the Pop Heathens phase of the Rolling Stones. They went from sort of the half blues purist, half top 40 British invasion band. There's that period, then the Pop Heathens, and then you go into the I don't even know the big four era, and then beyond, and there are phases beyond that. But this is a period that has always captured my imagination, and it's interesting. When I did like my first couple videos, I remember saying in the comments to somebody that I at some point wanted to do a Beatles video, and I was like politely discouraged from doing that. Like what I have gotten from the dear 52 of you, God bless you, is that you kind of enjoy the more obscure stuff. But I this is also and there will be plenty of that to come. But this is a map of, among other things, kind of just my tastes and things that I've cared about a lot over the years and have thought a lot about over the years. And so this is, the Stones are one of the very first bands that I really fell in love with. So I guess I will take a few minutes and just sort of talk a little bit about my history with the Stones, because hopefully between my history and my take on this era, that'll provide maybe interesting viewing material, and not just be a boring regurgitation of stuff you would already know about them. Let's say. So I had, when I was a very young child, I started buying records with my allowance money. This is like when I was like 6, 7 years old. And then I got in a lot of trouble at school, and I had all my records taken away from me, and I wasn't allowed to watch cable. Like I was basically like on lockdown from the ages of like 7 to about 11 or 12. Like all of my tastes were completely dictated by my parents. And they not only took away the records I liked, but they took away any clothes that I liked. They like I only could wear clothes that they chose for me. So there was a lot of stuff like that. I didn't have posters on my wall that they didn't buy for me. Like everything was like sort of programmed by them, and I would sit and like watch sitcoms with them at night. And I didn't really have any tastes of my own. And 1989 is when I turned 12, and that was sort of like the year things started to like crack. And I think I had kind of won enough of my parents' confidence that I could start abusing that trust, and start like getting wild again. It happened slowly, and so one of the first bands was the Stones because they were doing the Steel Wheels thing, the Steel Wheels comeback. And I don't know why I gravitated to them, but I did. Like, I hadn't seen MTV in like half a decade or ish at that point. So, like, there they were. And I just, for some reason, I just kind of said, that's my band. And they put out the 25 by 5 documentary, which I got a copy of and was absolutely obsessed with. I can truly say, people say that all the time, like, oh, I wore the record out or something. Like, I actually broke the VHS tape. Like, that was how much I watched that thing. I just became immersed in it. And then a year later, if you watched my Great Rock Books video, which I still haven't put any of that stuff away. It's all still right here, but it's a big pile right over here. But that was when I discovered the Doors, and the Doors were like where I was really off and running, and there was no coming back. But really, it starts with the Rolling Stones, and one of the reasons, I guess, why I'm starting with this. Eventually, I probably will do all of the Stones eras. They are an intensely fascinating band, even when the quality of the music isn't there sometimes, they are always fascinating, and always interesting to talk about and listen to and think about. So, but at any rate, not long after I got the 25 by 5 documentary, there was a book by Dezo Hoffman, who had been a photographer for the Beatles, and my understanding is he was fired by John Lennon for some photos of the Beatles water skiing that John didn't like. So Dezo Hoffman went over to work for the Stones, and I got a book of photographs that he had done, and between that and the documentary and taking books out at the library, I became really, really obsessed with Brian Jones, of course, the founding member of the band. And, and I read Bill Wyman's Stone Alone autobiography, where he talks a lot about Brian. And I just got completely obsessed with this guy. And the degree to which, and this is going to be a little weird, and I might lose some of you here, for a period between 1990 to 1992, I, not seriously, but kind of entertained the possibility that I was Brian Jones's reincarnation. There was a photo in the Dezo Hoffman book where he was wearing these cufflinks that he had gotten from Bo Diddley, and I had these like weird memories of having owned or worn those cufflinks. And like I would have dreams about putting the cufflinks on. Why my like 12-year-old brain, 13-year-old brain focused in on that, I have no idea. But for a while, I kind of was like, I think I might be his reincarnation. I think like that might be like what I was put here to do. And that I was disabused of that notion in 1992 when I was 14. My family, we went to England, the trip I referenced when I talked about this book. And we were at maybe it was like the Hard Rock. I remember they had Robbie Krieger's Gibson SG, which was like fucking amazing. Or one of his SGs. I'm sure he had more than one, but there it was. And I was all goo goo gaga about that. But they had a note that Brian Jones had written to somebody. And I remember staring up at this frame. And it was funny, too, because I remember we had gotten our food already, and the waiter was pointing out things in the place to go look at. And he said, oh, and that was signed by Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, to which, of course, my parents went, ooh. And I actually got up and left my food to go look at it. And I'm looking up at this handwriting, this very tight, distinct, what I feel is very like English handwriting. And I had this really like hard realization staring up at this thing on the wall, like, well, that was never my handwriting. I didn't do that. I've never written like that. 'Cause my writing's really messy. I was like, that was never me. And that was it. So as quickly as it came, it quickly left. I quickly was like, well, I was never like, I'm not the reincarnation of Brian. And all of a sudden, the baggage that had like mounted on my shoulders about that all of a sudden left. And I was like, no, I'm just me. That's all I am. I'm only myself. And it was this weird, I don't know. It was like this weird coming of age moment, you know. But the sort of the fixation with that and with that period has always remained. It's never gone away. So yeah, that's kind of, you know, that's, and the other thing is they were the first band that I bought music by after I decided to, you know, in '89, I remember, you know, I had just been listening to like pop music. So I had like you know, buying cassettes. I had, you know, the Fine Young Cannibals. I had Paula Abdul. What else did I have? I had the Escape Club, which was just fucking shit. UB40's Labor of Love. I had garbage music. And so when I decided to be serious and like listen to rock music, which was like my like, I'm not listening to, like, I'm not watching MTV's Top 20 video countdown on Friday nights anymore. Like, that's over. Like, I'm gonna listen to good music. So that was when the Rolling Stones, Van Halen, and then the Doors, and you know, and then I got really into Def Leppard, got really into Motley Crue. Those were kind of my two favorite bands for a couple of years, or sort of at the time current bands that were my two favorites. But the Rolling Stones and Aerosmith. The Stones and Aerosmith, as far as older bands, were like the two, like those were the first two that I started buying cassettes by. And I think I started with Some Girls. I think that Hot Rocks was the first. And I actually have it. This is the copy of Hot Rocks that I would have bought at like in '89. So, and I got this after coming back. I used to go with my aunt. She was really into Notre Dame football. And we got this coming back from a Notre Dame game. They had a record store like at the airport or something, wherever the hell we were. And I bought this. So this is the first thing I ever got. And then I got Some Girls. And then the 60s Stones were just still, though. They were, it was this kind of mythical, magical thing for me in a way that the other eras weren't. And so I got England's Newest Hitmakers. That was like a big get like a 60s album. And then I got the cassette of the first album that we're going to be talking about today, and that's December's Children. You might wonder, why in God's name am I starting with December's Children? Why are you reviewing this record at all? It doesn't have a terribly good reputation. Time has not been kind to it. My favorite YouTube channel and favorite music reviewer, Eddy Cannistraci, rated this as one of his least favorite Rolling Stones albums, or I think maybe his least favorite 60s Rolling Stones album. He does not think highly of it. And he did, by the way, he did a 2-part Stones discography, full discography review. That's excellent. I'll link to that because you really should watch it, because it's very, very much well worth watching. But why? Why this album, of all albums, would you use as a starting point, Rich? Well, because it was the one that, well, first of all, it was a weird fluke that I got England's Newest Hitmakers. The rest of the early stuff I just never saw. We didn't get a a CD player until the end of '92. First CD I ever got, by the way, was Exile on Main Street. So CDs weren't an option, and vinyl sort of was, but I still hadn't ventured out into going to used record stores yet. So I was still kind of reliant. I mean, I was, 12, 13 years old. So I was very much reliant on anything my aunt gave me or whatever my dad had. And my parents had pretty square tastes. So I was pretty limited. And pre-internet. In fact, Bill Wyman's book was the only sort of guide that I had, because he had the full UK and US discographies. That was sort of the only guide that I had. And I remember at a young age kind of being resigned to I just don't think I'm going to hear these songs on a particular release. So one of the first albums that I found of theirs was this, and people, I gotta tell you, I looked all over for it, was my janky ass copy of December's Children. I looked and looked and looked, and I cannot find it back there. Much to my chagrin. I found plenty of other cassettes that I will show you, but damn it, not that one. And I know I have it somewhere. Some of my cassettes of their albums either broke or I lost along the way. So like my original Beggar's Banquet, which was another one of the first ones I got, that is long gone. Who knows where the hell that is. But I had this weird copy of, I guess knowing now what I know via the internet, it was probably made in the 70s. It was really flimsy cardstock. It almost felt like it was like mimeographed, and it was like a white cassette. It was like really, really janky. And that was my copy of December's Children. And like, it really looked like photocopied. I mean, it looked, or I guess mimeographed, because it was like really high contrast, and it was only like half the cover. It was so weird and wrong looking. And that was sort of how the album sounded. I didn't put together really at that young of an age that it was in effect a compilation. I didn't quite grasp all of that. But I became really obsessed with this thing. Excuse me, as an act of appeasement to my parents, I had signed up for school band. I was a trumpet player in the school band, and we would go to these competitions. We would have these long bus drives out to Bumblebee Land for these competitions. And December's Children, for a number of reasons, became the tape I would listen to. Or going out on class field trips. In 8th grade, we took a class trip to Washington, D.C. via bus, and it was one of the only tapes I brought with me. I just really bonded with this thing, and the songs took on a great amount of importance and significance to me, and so that's why I'm starting with this. But also, I think that it's the first real statement from the Stones' Pop Heathens phase. So the Rolling Stones were going along, and, it's interesting. I think one of the reasons why the Beatles' legacy is so cemented is because their arc is very easy to understand. It's very, very linear, right? The songs are mostly released in the order in which they were written. The albums are mostly released in the order in which they were recorded. Even though there's all the Please Please Me songs that Lennon and McCartney wrote, the early songs feel like early songs, and there's very much a feeling both with recording technology, the artwork, everything, the album format itself, that you're watching the entire thing develop in real time. So there's this very natural, organic, easy to understand arc and sense of development with them as songwriters, musicians, album makers, then auteurs and visionaries and psychics and seers and politicians and secular clergymen and pop artists and all the roles that the Beatles took on. It's very easy to understand. And it's also easy to understand because you can disregard, for somebody like me who, you know, the British albums and then the past masters were readily available. So it was even more easy to understand them because then you were purely understanding them on their own terms, and it was just fantastic. So the Beatles, you know, you could easily disregard the U.S. albums. You could just kind of throw that out the window. So I talked about that in my books video, where I came back from England and just made cassette copies. I made cassette sequences of all the British records, all the singles, all the EPs, and I just listened to those cassettes then, until later on I got the albums proper, right? And that was the way to hear them. And with the Stones, it's so much messier in a lot of ways, because the UK and US albums overlap in weird ways. The Stones would sort of give exclusives to the American records that they wouldn't necessarily to the British records. And it flip-flops. Then there are clearly British records that are sequenced more carefully. Like, there is sort of an anarchic slapdash quality to how some of those albums are put together. The best of the early albums now, I still think is still like a huge missed opportunity, because that was mostly culled from when the Rolling Stones came to Chicago and recorded at Chess Studios in '64. I think they did 2 or 3 days at Chess Studios, and if that was the Beatles doing that, that just would have been the album. It would have been, there's a linear quality to how the Beatles put stuff out, you know, that the Stones don't have. It's always a bit more of a patchwork with them. I mean, even when you get into like the Big Four records, they would hold songs back for certain albums. I mean, they are not as linear as the Beatles are. They're on the other hand, their discography is also not a goddamn train wreck trying to figure out between the UK and US, like maybe the Animals or maybe kind of the Yardbirds are, where you just look at it and say, what the hell is this? You know, so they're sort of in between the two extremes. If the Beatles are the easiest to understand, and let's say the Animals are, why is this here? The Stones are maybe in the middle of that. But the Stones sort of pop heathen phase, I think, begins, or the first sign of it begins with the album before, and that is the U.S. album, Out of Our Heads. And the reason I say that, and here's I have all the 2002 remasters, which Keith always said they did a really good job on, and I agree with him. I think Keith is right. I think these are exemplary. Anyway, I bought most of my Stones 60s records. Jesus. Probably in the middle 2000s. It was way later, because you just wouldn't see them, or you'd see them for crazy prices. But there are 3 songs on this record that I think start to not just create their songwriting voice and their attitude and their approach, but really usher in kind of what they were to be, and that Satisfaction and the Spire and the Fly and the Under Assistant West Coast Promotion Man. I think that, you know, as much as people talk about like the Beach Boys and the Beatles, or the Beatles and the Stones, you know, for instance, Brian Wilson Brian Wilson and Phil Spector. Brian Wilson was obsessed with the Rolling Stones. He was apparently as obsessed with them as he was the Beatles or Spector. But I think sometimes what people don't talk about is, in particular, Mick's obsession with Bob Dylan, but Keith as well. And Brian, I mean, Brian was great friends with Dylan and would have ring up crazy phone bills having 8-hour transatlantic calls with Dylan. Could you fucking imagine listening to that stuff? God damn. Anyway, to be a fly on the wall for... Anyway, but I think that, I think that the Stones versus, Stones versus Beatles is one thing, but I think Stones versus Dylan is another thing. And I think Mick took a lot of lyrical cues, especially from, stuff like Positively Fourth Street, like some of the more straightforward Dylan things. And I think that really imbued a lot of his lyric writing attitude. And I think that combination, plus just, the inventiveness of him and Keith, and then the way that they were egged on by Andrew Loog Oldham, I think that the pressure cooker of all of that created a songwriting style. And I kind of think of those three songs. I know Keith always says that The Last Time was their first great song, but I kind of look at those three songs as sort of the big bang of the band and launching them really into their next phase, and launching them out of being blues purists or evangelists for black R&B and rock and roll. So anyway, there's the UK version of Out of Our Heads, which is sort of halfway between the American Out of Our Heads and then the album I'm going to be talking about, December's Children. They have a remarkably similar covers. Ha ha ha. But so you can look up the track sequence, but it's the UK version of Out of Our Heads kind of splits the difference. It's great to listen to because these are all just great songs, and most configurations are going to sound cool and be interesting. But this is the one that I was raised with. I had a janky ass cassette that light marks. I have a janky ass album of it. I mean, look at the spine. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just all like a cat was using that as a, the world's thinnest cat was using that as a scratching post. This thing doesn't play terribly well, and it doesn't. I mean, I've owned worse albums, but but at any rate, in August of 1965, I Can't Get No Satisfaction is riding high atop the charts. The Stones are are touring the United Kingdom, and they go up to Ireland, and this movie is made, which Charlie Is My Darling, which is awesome to have on DVD because for those of us who love the Rolling Stones, we had to make do with all sorts of just bootleg ass VHS 50th generation, and then they would cut other stuff in, and it was always a mess. So to actually be able to watch this, when did this come out? 2012. If you would have told me in 1996 that I would be able to actually just watch this one day, and it would be in anywhere even approaching decent quality, I would have been amazed. This movie is interesting. I don't rate it along Don't Look Back or A Hard Day's Night. I don't know that it necessarily goes to those heights, but it's still a really, really fascinating portrait of the band. So the final stuff for this was filmed on September the 4th in Belfast. September the 4th, 1965 in Belfast. Recording sessions for the material here started September the 5th in Hollywood at RCA Studios. So one day later, they're out of Belfast and into Hollywood doing recordings. There's a really good Stones website that I'm going to link to. They're very hyper about having their stuff jacked. Don't worry, I'm gonna give credit where credit's due. I am using notes because there's a lot to remember. But anyway, on September the 5th of 1965, the Stones. So they already had started recording some of the stuff, but they did overdubs for the singer, not the song, talking about you, get off my cloud, and she said yeah. Then the next day, on the 6th, they did Blue Turns to Gray, Gotta Get Away, and I'm Free. So, pretty amazing. I am not going to talk about the Stones singles in this period, most of which are gathered up here. I will talk about some of the standalone singles as we go along, but I mean, this is a compilation, and so it gathers everything. It gathers everything here. So, yeah, the first song, She Said Yeah, written by, there's two people who wrote it. I forget the one person who wrote it, but you know who wrote it? You know who co-wrote it? Fucking Sonny Bono. That's right, Sonny Bono. The future of Sonny and Cher. Or did Sonny and Cher exist by this point already? Huh. But, he came up with Spectre. Then, Cher and future of unwatchable, television, what are the variety shows? And future, was he mayor of Palm Springs? Was he then a senator? And then the skiing didn't work out so good. So, you'd never think that Sonny Bono would co-write a song that badass and feverish and intense. The cover version that I know is by Larry Williams, which is odd because most of the Larry Williams songs, I thought he tended to write his own material, but, back then people did a lot of other people's material as well. The Larry Williams version is interesting because it's far more laid back, and it's far more of a, how do I get it? A love song. He's frantic and he's excited because he's gonna because she said yeah. So he's fucking ready to go. But it's also, you get the sense that maybe they have a history, that maybe they really like each other, like it's gonna be like a marriage or something. Maybe it's even on a wedding night. Who knows? Maybe they've never done anything before. But it's a little looser, a little more confident, and a little more emotionally certain. The Stones version, however, is it always sounded to me like the janky mimeographed cover. By the way, this awesome photo of the guys was taken by Jared Mankiewicz, and he will come up later, so remember the name. But it's so compressed and fucked and intense, and Mick just sings it with angst. He sings it like a man who has only had rejection, right? Like he is the angry, rejected guy it's finally gonna fucking happen. Like he's had to wait a little too long, and now he's like gonna fucking make the most of it. Like he's gonna like fucking give this girl like everything, like double time. And just the performance of it just sounds like a fucking jet engine. I think one of the reasons why, and Edwin made this point about the early Stones being true progenitors of punk rock, and that's a 100% correct assertion. This really is, because my jump as a teenager from this to listening to Pussy Galore, it's not that big of a jump. Or the Cramps, it is not a big jump, or even backwards into some of the Wilder Sun Records stuff. Like it's just so boiled down, and it's not even red hot. It's like a big white hot fucking solar flare in your eyes. It's amazing, but it's also kind of badly recorded, but I think that adds to it. I think the just the sheer rawness of the production meets the sheer rawness of the band's performance and of Mick's, like, oh my god, I've got to do this now, fucking, like, desperation. So it's one of my favorite things that they ever recorded. It's amazing. It's like one of the best rock and roll recordings ever, I think. They fucking nailed this song. And it was co-written by Sonny Bono, so I salute you, Sonny Bono. I never thought I would say that. And then the next is Talking About You, yeah. The Chuck Berry song. Chuck, talk about confidence. Chuck plays the song almost as his version is a lot more, in a weird way, confident. And the song is almost like peekaboo or something. It's almost like a light joke. Like, let me tell you about this girl. It's you, you know? And Chuck, like, can get away with it because, like, there's a suaveness to Chuck, and and Chuck is, like, one of the great. I mean, he's like the first truly great rock and roll songwriter, and he's like, I think in a lot of ways he's probably the first, like, real genius of rock and roll. Him and Little Richard are sort of like, as important as Elvis is, and as important as Jerry Lee and a lot of those other people are. I kind of think a lot of the psychology, but also musical aesthetics. I think a lot of things kind of start with somewhere between Chuck and Richard. I think the Stones play it actually more laconic than Chuck does. If Chuck plays it like he knows he's going to get the girl, the Stones play it like they already have her, and they're just kind of keeping her entertained on a night drive back to his place or something. Like, it's a really, really, really cool performance, and I've always just loved the groove that they hit, and they don't need to force it. Like, they just keep it cooking just enough, and even though the groove is totally different than She Said Yeah, it's still, She Said Yeah sets it up that they just sound like two perfect rock and roll songs, like two halves of the same perfect rock and roll song. So I've always loved that as a 1-2 opener. And then we go back to 1963, and with Arthur Alexander's "You Better Move On," one of my absolute favorite songs of all time. In the same way, it's also interesting how the Beatles covered Chuck Berry versus the Stones. In that sense, the Beatles did a lot of Arthur Alexander songs: Anna, Soldier of Love, Shot of Rhythm and Blues, and there's others, and John clearly, Where Have You Been All My Life? John clearly got a lot of his singing style from Arthur Alexander. He was very clearly influenced by him. It's interesting that the Stones covered him too. I think Arthur Alexander, and he wrote most of his material. Arthur, I think, is a hugely underrated figure. His songs are amazing, but what is really interesting about Arthur Alexander is temperamentally he's like miles away from like a James Brown or an Otis Redding, or he is or a Jackie Wilson, or he's not a big explosive personality. He is everything with him is like a quiet dignity. He's like a rhythm and blues Nat King Cole or something. There's a quiet dignity, and all of his stronger emotions are always just under the surface. And so when he's angry, it's that he's about to get angry. It's always like it's on the verge, and he's holding on to himself, and he's going to maintain his pride and his sense of self-worth and self-standing. and that is the psychological power of a lot of his songs. And so I love his stuff. And you would think that maintaining dignity and poise would not be the hallmarks of a young Mick Jagger, especially in 1963 Mick Jagger. You would think that a young Mick Jagger might make a hash out of that. Mick fucking pulls it off. It's one of the earliest indications of just how great of a singer and frontman and interpreter that Mick is. It really shows, if you think about it in the kind of long range, it makes sense that this was the same guy who was able to do Love in Vain and The Midnight Rambler on the same album. It makes sense that this was the guy who could sing Brown Sugar and Wild Horses and Moonlight Mile and Bitch on the same album and inhabit all of that, you know? It's a young indicator that this guy is a brilliant sort of singing method actor, and just has a lot of innate, long before kind of the intellectual stuff kicked in, long before he met Marianne Faithfull, and long before, like, he already had all the instincts to all of that. So Mick sings it fantastically. Brian's beautiful acoustic strumming creates a wonderful rolling propulsion, and then it's one of the, you know, it's one of the great indicators of Keith's fantastic heavy right hand. You know, you listen to his electric, his stabs on the electric, and they're perfect, you know, perfectly timed, perfect emphasis, and just heavy enough to give it some more gravity. And you know, so when Mick sings that he's gonna get angry, it makes it all the more believable. But then again, Mick is plenty believable on himself, and just what a great production, especially for 1963. Andrew, people don't, you know, sort of shit talk Andrew's production style because he wasn't really a producer. But Jesus Christ, beautiful. The background vocals, it's fantastic. Like, it's a great recording and a great interpretation of a great song. So the next up is, Look What You've Done, a Muddy Waters song recorded at the Chess Sessions. Should have been on now. You know, why wasn't it? Who knows? Why was it held back? Who knows? Amazing. It's just a great blues song. Mick, again, interpreting it completely in his own style. He sounds far more natural than he does maybe on You Better Move On, where you know, he's singing in a higher register or whatever. This is just completely natural. I think that session, my understanding of it was they really did just kind of record it live, kind of in the round, and they just sound completely natural. There are recordings. Wonder if I have that somewhere. Here it is. There are recordings of Buddy Holly on this set. I will eventually do a massive Buddy Holly review, but there's some stuff on here, I think on the second disc, where they talk about where there's recordings of Buddy. Is it Buddy and just Jerry Allison, the drummer? And it's just them with like a 2-track running, and they record, I have 3, 4, 5, whatever songs. And it's just super loose and super casual, and it's just the two of them, and they sound like the best rock and roll band in the world. Just these two guys just playing, just in the room. And that's the sound of the Stones' Chess Session. You know? It's just these 5 guys. They sound perfect. They sound like they've been playing together for 15 years. You know, and also Brian is playing harmonica on this record, on this song. Brian's harmonica playing. I know Keith and other people like to say how great Mick is on the harmonica. Brian was the real harmonica player in the band. Mick, no disrespect to Mick, he's good. Brian was great. Brian could really fucking do it. So amazing song. And then we get to the first original on this, and that is The Singer, Not the Song. And I think that what I had talked about with the sort of the 3 songs from the beginning of 65 or middle of 65. I think this, and one of the reasons I always sort of treated this as an album and as an unusual album, but an album nonetheless, is because I think that the stuff recorded in those 2 days in September of 65, to me, that, like, the Stones and what the Stones are really, really, really coalesce. And the band that you see here, these kind of emerging, ultra cocky, ultra confident young men, like, who are really coming into themselves and really ready to kind of take on the world with a Brando-esque "what have you got" kind of vibe and level of believability, cocksure confidence. That's, I think that is really solidified. What is hinted at in the, not hinted at, but what emerges in those 3 songs from Out of Our Heads, to me, is solidified here into a more fully rounded worldview. And so the singer, not the song, to me, is like they're already adding dimension to the outspoken, post Dylan, tough, swaggering, confident young men. And this song, to me, in my own life, when I was 13, 14 years old, like, it reminds me of, like when I got my first girlfriend, and, and how we kind of just were our own little world, sort of unto ourselves. And, to me, the singer, not the song, really is like the sound of youth. There's a youthfulness to because these songs in some ways are slightly inarticulate, and they're not as fully formed as the Beatles, are certainly not as fully formed as Dylan. They don't have the world weariness of Ray Davies, or the historical reach of Ray Davies, and they also don't have the sort of manic lashing out of Pete Townsend. There is a very, very, very specific authorial voice to what Jagger and Richards are doing. And the singer, not the song, is just like, to me, like, it always reminded me of, like, it's like when you've already broken away from your parents, or you've already broken away from the church, or from you've already broken away at school, and maybe, like, you're growing your hair out different, and, like, people are just starting to notice. You know what I mean? This song, to me, is like the first time that people start to look at you a little weird, and they realize, or like, you're dressing differently, and they're starting to put together that they don't have any say, and that you really aren't like them, and you don't think like them, and you're starting to assert your own feelings. And that's the sound of, like, that's the sound of this thing. To me, that's like the vibe of this photo. That's, and I don't want to read too much artistic intention into what is a US cash-in compilation, but then I don't know, because it's like, to me, the weirdo title, Andrew LeGoldham's weirdo beat poetry, pseudo beat poetry, this, to me, is kind of a statement. It came out in December 65. The Beatles had post dates, or does it? Would it have been right at the same time as Rubber Soul? Maybe Rubber Soul came out like a week or two later. I don't remember the release date of that record, but I think they're both December 65 releases. And, Dylan had already done his first 2 Electric albums. Like, I think in a weird way this is, and I don't want to read too much intention into it, but I also am, on the other hand, am comfortable reading intention into it, because I'm cool with it being a weird patchwork. I'm cool with it being a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and saying it hangs together because it hangs together, and what are you gonna fucking do about it? You know, like that kind of is the Stones vibe. So to me, the singer, not the song, has like a world within it, and you know, just that one verse of, because I think that's another thing about when you're young. People, I think, I did this when I was young, and I noticed this with people around me. You immediately adopt kind of a like an affected, like, oh, I've been doing this forever, you know. So just that verse of, you know, it's not the way you give it willingly, others do it without thrilling me, and they're kind of like, yeah, others do it without, like, which I'd only had one girl, like, but yeah, like, but you thrill me, like. You were lucky to get the girl, but within a year, within a few months, you're like, yeah. Like, that's a funny response of youth, and there's a callowness to it that the Stones, I think, articulate perfectly. But just that sense, but also just then the kind of under the surface hinting at kind of roiling emotions and ambivalence and not really being sure. Like, on one hand, you're asserting yourself. On the other hand, you're not really sure of a lot of things, or you have, I don't know, uncertainties, or you're trying to overcome your own lack of self-esteem or whatever. Like, it's just, to me, it's just a perfectly articulate, or a perfect articulation of a point in young people's lives. Like, they just fucking nail it. And also, you know, I know people always say, like, oh, Connection is the first time, like, Keith really sings. Keith basically just takes this song over. his harmony vocal basically just becomes, to me at least, the dominant vocal. And how perfect. It's such a Keith song. This is the forerunner of Coming Down Again. The guy who is, like, too numb to feel on Coming Down Again, yeah, this is how he started out. Like, yep, exactly. The other thing is Charlie is awesome on this. Charlie is one of my favorite drummers ever. For those of you who don't know, do you not know Charlie Watts, the drummer? Jesus Christ. Charlie, I think, you know, Charlie was always great, but, like, I think as they better captured his drum sound, but also as the Stones emerge as songwriters and find their own groove as a band, like, Charlie just goes from strength to strength, even though he was always great. And then we get a version of Route 66, which, a live version of Route 66, it's awesome, it's manic, it's remarkably well recorded for 1965, but still sounds like fucked up, high contrast, grainy black and white. Like, it's still, but still sounds awesome. And again, kind of prefiguring, and even again, also with the patchworkiness of the album. Like, you have to understand, at this, right around the time, not long after I got this, I got Walk Among Us by the Misfits, which side 2 begins with the live version of Mommy Can I Go Out and Kill Tonight. Like, this all made sense to me. This was not, like, this wasn't weird, like, oh, it's a compilation. Like, I on an intuitive level, sitting on the bus at 13, 14, I got it. Like, it worked for me. And it wasn't a big jump for me from this to the Misfits, or, like I said, Pussy Galore, or the Cramps, or even Nirvana. So the thing that's funny about Route 66, as opposed to, you know, Iggy has always been very influenced by Mick. It's interesting, though, because Iggy is so manic. You know, and Iggy and Jim Morrison and James Brown, who Mick obviously was influenced by, but they're like shaman, you know, and they are the whirling dervish. And what's interesting about Mick is that, or even like the Beatles, like there's like the Beatles on stage, and then there's the crowd of screaming girls, you know. What's interesting about Mick is the screaming girls are manic, the band is manic, especially the guitars, right? I mean, this is Keith and Brian, like, fucking, you know. What's interesting is Mick is just riding the top of that. Mick doesn't go nuts. And Mick is kind of like, yeah, like we're just going down Route 66. And what I get from that, and I think one of the reasons why Mick was such a good showman and such a good front man, I mean, he still is. I mean, the fact that he can do it at his age is unreal. But there's almost like a supplication to the audience. Like he's not, it's almost the opposite of the shaman. Like he's not asserting himself and coming out at you. He kind of allows himself to sort of be devoured by the crowd in a weird way. And I think that act of supplication, because there's always a vibe with the Beatles of like, you're never going to touch us when they're on stage. But you'll notice that the Stones stages always get invaded. The Stones, like, there's always kids rushing the stage, whereas it didn't happen that often with the Beatles. There's an interesting wall that the Stones don't have that the Beatles did. It's a fascinating little, whereas the Who, because they were so kinetic and crazed, scared people from coming forward. So it's interesting. But it's a great version of Route 66. I mean, it's a song's a standard, and Mick sings it. You know, Mick sings it in a way that only like an outsider, only somebody from a different country could, because he just sings it with so much enthusiasm. I mean, like, I was not an enthusiastic American in 1991, 1992, coming off the Gulf War and stuff. Like, stuff like this, and you know, it gave me enthusiasm about, not that it didn't, I wouldn't say that it made me patriotic, but I saw the beauty of this country through these guys or through the other British invasion acts in a way. You know, they helped give me an appreciation for where I am from that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Then we flip the record over. This is the next great leap past I Can't Get No Satisfaction, and that's, of course, Get Off of My Cloud. I don't know that I need to say too much about it. You've heard it, obviously. It's one of the greatest rock and roll songs ever. It was obviously a very important single. I'm Free, and I want to say The Singer Not the Song were the US and UK B-sides, I think. But what I will say about the song is it's one of the first ones that I've read Keith criticizing Andrew's production of, which that's Keith's right. It's funny that the production critique starts with Satisfaction because Keith wanted that to be a horn riff. But I think 60 years later or whatever, can't we all say that Keith's wrong? Doesn't it sound much better with the fuzz tone? Like, you know, does anybody think that it really should have been a horn riff? Like, if Keith had had his way, would it have been better with a horn riff? The Stones didn't have horns on their record yet. It would have been the first incorporation. Would it have been awkward? Yeah, maybe. Does it sound better with Keith, like, not inventing, but carving out some new sonic territory? Yeah. Not inventing, because I mean Dave Davies, but anyway, but one of the things I love about, I love the raggediness of the production. I love the group vocals. Mick's lyrics are some of the sharpest, funniest, absurdist, great social commentary, youth kicking against the pricks, defiance. The vibe, the spirit of it is perfect and awesome, and it's a perfect articulation. Charlie's drumming is... Charlie is a force of nature. Charlie, again, gives it so much gravity and groove and power. Charlie steers the band, you know, and I will say more about that later, but it's Charlie's song as much as it's Mick and Keith's. And then there's just that little ascending guitar lick. It's just perfect. It's perfect. And what I would assume is Keith's little kinetic supercharged rhythm injections. When Keith talked about, was it Don Everly? I forget which of the Everly brothers, like, and admiring his rhythm playing on one of their early tours, like him standing off to the side of the stage and watching, like, how he would, like, attack the acoustic guitar, like, on Wake Up Little Susie or something. Keith really learned those lessons well. I mean, his little flourishes are just absolutely glorious, and they're all over this. It to me, I love it more than I Can't Get No Satisfaction. I just think it's such a lightning in a bottle, perfect song and recording and performance and production. I think they could have spent 5 years working on it and not improved it. And they knocked it out in a day after they'd flown from Belfast. Like, fucking ridiculous. Like, it's just ridiculous. And then we get to another major Mick and Keith statement of purpose, and that's the thing. Like the defiance, the what do you got? The just the cocky young men taking on the world, the young men in pursuit of pleasure, these motherfuckers on the pirate ship, as Keith put it, a load of devils thrown into heaven, ransacking heaven, the Pop Heathens. Singer, not the song, and then especially this next song, I'm Free. This is what gives it depth, and this is what gives it meaning. They're not just doofy dudes run amok. There's some sort of, underneath all of it, there is some sort of, I don't want to say moral, but some sort of, I don't know, spiritual or psychic or sense that they're right. There's a rightness to, I don't know, there's a rightness to their vibe or to their attitude. And I'm Free is just such a great articulation of that. And I love that they don't play it for crazy rock and roll intensity. It is this weird, and I mean, think about, like, of its time. I mean, this is September of 1965. Who's playing like this? Like, this weird, flowing, beautiful, oceanic. I mean, to me, it predates post-punk. It predates Jane's Addiction. It predates, like, it's just absolutely glorious and, like, shimmering, and played at such, like, a perfect, Charlie finds exactly the right groove, and the guitars are just gorgeous, and then the stacked harmonized vocals, and the lyrics are so boiled down but so perfect. It's not, Mick does not over-egg the pudding with the lyrics. Like, the lyrics are sparse but exact, and again, right, and just and throwing in just enough little elbows of, I'm free to please, please who I choose, just these perfect little stings to make it precise enough. Brilliant lyrics, and just that he had the songwriting intelligence to not overwrite it. It is a perfect, glimmering, perfect song. I absolutely love it. I've listened to it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And I think, for me, as a young person, hearing this, listening to this at midnight, it's an incredible statement of purpose, and it opens you up to the world. It's a masterful song. And again, the idea that this is all sort of coming out in the first real flowering of their songwriting. And they'd written great songs before this. They wrote great songs. I like the early songs. I love Tell Me. Jesus Christ, that's an amazing song. But this is where they went up a level, and they're now, they're now doing stuff that plays as novels or films. They're already next to the Beatles and Dylan and the Beach Boys, and the Byrds are just around the corner. Like, there's the sort of whole rest of the explosion. But like this album, even though it's a U.S. cash-in compilation, this one to me again plays like a novel or a film, And then as Tears Go By is the next. As Tears Go By, Was it the first song that Mick and Keith wrote together? Yeah, I think it is. Marianne Faithfull had a hit with it, and then of course, post Beatles Yesterday. I think it was written before Yesterday. I forget. It doesn't totally pre or post date Yesterday, I want to say, but but you know, clearly Andrew knew what he was doing by putting it out. But Marianne Faithfull had the hit with it, and then the Stones put out their version. It's not my favorite of their songs. It's never really been my favorite. It's a little awkward, but it's also it's interesting that early on, Mick goes for where up until this point, especially like Can't Get No Satisfaction, Get Off My Cloud, under Assistant West Coast Promotion Man, Spider and the Fly. He's the impudent youth, and he's this I don't even, he's not even so much an angry young man. He's just really, really, sarcastic and defiant and just an immovable object. It's interesting that this is the first time that Mick jumps into the persona of the wealthy, where it's almost like a class study, and Mick gets really into that later on. I always felt egged on by the influence of Ray Davies, who was like the master of writing from that perspective. But it is interesting that early on, Mick had the instinct to be this like, world-weary, old, wealthy man who is staring out from his own Shangri-La, saying, "What is it all for, really?" It's interesting, and the song does have a certain amount of pathos to it. It's just never been my favorite, but it is clearly the beginning of where he is going to go into songs like Backstreet Girl and even all the way into Some Girls and Beyond. So it's one of the personas that he jumps into a lot more as time goes by. And then, of course, there's Gotta Get Away. One of my absolute goddamn favorites. I love this fucking song. One of the other things about this period of songs, too, is I love how just brief they are. They're so in and out, and the songs just kind of end. There's just, again, it's articulate inarticulateness. The kind of, yeah, well, that's what I have to say, and they just stop. I love that. And the Gotta Get Away, because it's almost country, it's almost R&B. Mick uses some kind of soul man kind of interjections, but it is such a fantastically satisfying nagging melody and nagging vocal style that Mick uses. I love it. Like it could have been an R&B hit for the Drifters, or like you could see an R&B group doing it and they would do it a lot straighter. But this is just, it's kind of wrong in all the right ways. And it maybe isn't the major statement of purpose that a couple of the other songs are, but it really fits in perfectly. And I absolutely love it. And it's another one I've listened to God knows how many times, and I can just put on whenever. And then there is Blue Turns to Gray. What a weird... So again, adding depth to this weird pop heathen articulation of youth. What a fascinating sort of portrait of the deep fleeting emotions that young people feel. I mean, Blue Turns to Gray, like how perfect. And this idea that it just goes to sort of ambivalence. Like you might be sad for just an hour or something, and then Blue Turns to Gray, and what a great statement about depression. What a great statement about being young and depressed and uncertain, that your confidence immediately goes out from under you, that you can be ultra cocksure and then get kneecapped by somebody. Like, it's just such it's just such a weird, perfect distillation, again, of youth and stuff that kind of doesn't happen after a certain point in your life. Like, it rarely feels like that, you know. You go through other things in life that are actually far worse, much worse. But there's something about that, and like the first time you're experiencing those emotions, Mick nails it. Blue turns to gray. Like, what a great line! It's awesome. It's perfect. And again, adding depth and dimension to the sort of these archetypes that they're creating. Perfect. And then we end with super manic, super nuts, ultra white hot rock and roll action with I'm Moving On. It's Hank Snow. So originally, you know, not ultra white hot rock and roll action, but it's again another live recording. It is awesome, and I think Keith kind of horns in again. It's so manic and again weird and wrong sounding, and again just another hop, skip, and a jump to like crazy the pig fuck bands or punk bands. Like it's ragged in all the right ways. It's perfect and it's wrong. It's perfect in its wrongness. It's perfect in how manic it is. It's just an amazing performance, and it just kind of goes off the rails, and it fits. I love this goddamn thing. Love it. And yes, it's a cash-in compilation, but it somehow transcends that and becomes, because of the force of articulation of the September 1965 songs and recordings, it somehow becomes something, it transcends itself and becomes a major artistic creative statement. But good Lord Almighty, the Rolling Stones' Pop Heathens phase was just starting, and we're gonna get to the next records right now. So, December 1965, the Stones are back in at RCA Studios in Hollywood, where they had done the recordings that wound up on December's Children. And they start recording their next album, originally called "Could You Walk on the Water?" And from what I understand, the photo shoot that resulted in the Big Hits, High Tides, and Green Grass compilation, that was the photo shoot for what would have been that that album. That got rejected. It's interesting that just predates. I mean, that didn't make it out into the wider public, so it wasn't like a bigger scandal. But it's interesting that just about predates the Bigger Than Jesus thing. I will again reference Eddy Cannistraci. He did a video about Jeff Beck, and he talked about like singles coming out like a couple days ahead of each other. Like how sometimes like something's just like 1 month ahead of. It's like it's interesting how all of that works out. I remember interview with Ray Davis where he said that it really did feel like everyone was involved in a race. As he put it, it was to make the ultimate pop record, or the greatest pop record ever made. And that he felt that that's what fueled a lot of the sort of competition within the 60s. Which is entirely possible, obviously. So anyway, so the songs recorded, they did Don't You Bother Me, Going Home, Mother's Little Helper, which would be, Mother's Little Helper, 19th Nervous Breakdown, which would be their next single, Ride On Baby, which ended up on Flowers, Sad Day, which was the B-side of the next single, Sitting on a Fence, one of my favorite songs of all time, which was on Flowers and on my beloved More Hot Rocks, and Take It or Leave It. Oh, and Think. So that was the first set of recording sessions for what becomes Aftermath. So, but initially out of that was the single 19th Nervous Breakdown and Sad Day. I forget what the B-side in England was. It was the B-side like As Tears Go By or something. That's one thing, like when I talked about Slapdash, the Stones didn't have the... I don't know. I don't know who was making some of those decisions. I don't know if Andrew Loog Oldham was. The Stones did not have the level of auteurness or artfulness that the Beatles had, or or even that Brian Wilson had. The idea of having As Tears Go By as the B-side is just like madness. However, excuse me, 19th Nervous Breakdown and Sad Day as a single is incredible. That is a truly artful behemoth of a single. 19th Nervous Breakdown, obviously, I mean, you all know that song. It's interesting in that it is such a post Like a Rolling Stone song. It's super lyric driven, and that it's, talking sense or talking down to or doing a dressing down of some, entitled high society kind of rich bitch, which Mick really makes his lyrical focus from here on out for a really long time. Mick, I think, has gotten more out of that as a model than, like, it's interesting. It's kind of a modern version, or the English rock star postmodern whatever version of the blues framework of, you've hurt me, but you're gonna want me again someday, and I won't be there, right? I mean, how many songs are written out of that framework? Mick takes the sort of poor little or spoiled little rich girl who either is a cold-blooded backstabber, or too confused and absurd for her own good. Mick has gotten more mileage out of that and has turned that into more songs and has taken it from so many perspectives. It's an interesting approach. And I know that there are people who don't like that. I personally, I get a little... by the time we're in the 80s with him with that, I start to think, Jesus, dude, like there are other frameworks you can use. But here, when he's young and kind of raw and in his prime, he kind of couldn't lose with that as a framework. I forget who it was. Somebody pointed out once, like, how many Prince songs had like a really similar rhythmic structure that were kind of like with P-Funk or something, like where everything was on the one kind of all the time. It didn't even matter what the tempo of the song was. There was this ever-present one, even through all the musical styles and shifts, that Prince just kept returning to that no matter what. I think that that's something that great artists do. I think that that's something that really prolific artists do. And I personally don't really have a problem with it. Again, because it's a framework that you can use as a launching off point to talk about all sorts of things, or juxtapose all sorts of images and ideas. And I think Mick got as much mileage and imbued as much imagination and just great quotable lyrics out of that. I think he got as much out of that as you possibly could. So I don't know. I don't fault him for it. So anyway, that's, and the other thing about 19th Nervous Breakdown that's interesting is, I think that, I would imagine that it's Keith providing sort of more of the hooks and thinking more in kind of a more classical songwriter-y kind of way on that. Since the song is so lyric and vocal driven. But there's a lot of great stuff on there too, in terms of Bill Bill Wyman, who I somehow have not mentioned yet up until now, the bass player, Bill Wyman, one of the great bass players in rock and roll. Bill does some really cool, did they call it Zoom bass? Some really, really awesome kind of sonic disruption at the end. And I think it's one of my favorite things about that recording. It's something that I always look forward to. But I always sort of felt like the hooks and sort of the opening lick and the turnaround, like I've always felt that it's slightly grafted on, almost like Mick. I don't know how the song was written, but it just feels like a big block of lyrics that they sort of tried to figure out, like, okay, we need to put musical elements in here in order to make it a single and make it memorable. So and they did it. Like, it's amazing. It's an amazing song. But yeah, I've always, I feel like, again, they never had necessarily the artfulness that Brian Wilson or Phil Spector or the Beatles or Dylan had. There's always this, if you want to call it rawness, or I don't know, but like with the Stones, and that's part of what I like about them though, is like the folds and cuts and staples and seams are showing. And you can kind of divine what their thought process is. Whereas, like with Bob Dylan, I mean, I don't know how the hell he wrote Desolation Row. Nobody does. Even if you know how he did it, like even if you know the day and the hotel that he was in and the typewriter that he used, like you'll never really know how in God's name he came up with that, or Tombstone Blues, or Visions of Johanna, or any of his other masterpieces, And you can know all the facts behind Strawberry Fields Forever, but you're never really going to understand just how John Sitting Alone in Almeria, Spain really came up with that, But the Stones, you can kind of work it out. And that's just part of what I find really charming and cool and interesting, because ultimately their work was at the same level as their peers. They were one of the leading lights. They were that incredible and deserve their spot right up at the front, So anyway, and then the B-side is Sad Day, and Sad Day is absolutely incredible. Again, for a band that I think gets unfairly tagged as not being at the forefront as some of their peers, Sad Day, what could be, again, like a song by the Drifters, or what could be a Motown song, and has kind of an R&B feel to it, winds up, when it goes into, I don't even know if it's the reality or if it's a dream sequence, but the weird doddering piano, and Jack Nietzsche, so Phil Spector's arranger, Jack Nietzsche, plays piano on that, and the weird doddering piano and how it kind of goes into this like other song. And, the Beatles were always great at using middle eights as sort of either songs within songs, but then as sort of song interruptions. This is just this recurring motif, and it's so unsongwriter-like to insert, and it's just this kind of pure piece of sonic exploration. And when it does come back in the fade out, I don't know what that is. If that's like a trumpet, or it's really, really weird sounding, and it's amazing. So I truly don't know what that is, what instrument that is. I don't know if it's a trumpet or a French horn, or it could be a harmonica, like a really compressed harmonica. Who knows? But it's just a really cool piece of studio experimentation, and I don't think the Stones get enough credit for that. And this will, as we go along, I will touch upon that more. So that is that single. Then the second round of Aftermath sessions happened in February of March of 66, when they recorded Flight 505, High and Dry, I Am Waiting, It's Not Easy, Lady Jane, Long, Long While, which was the B-side of the next single, Out of Time, Painted Black, Stupid Girl, Under My Thumb, and What to Do. Jesus Christ. What a fucking lineup of songs that is. So, and then out of that second session, begat the Paint It Black single. In Stupid Girl was the B-side in the US, and then in England, Long Long While was the B-side. Paint It Black is, I mean, talk about studio experimentation. It's one thing to use, the Beatles, really the whole Indian thing with British invasion bands begins with the Kinks' See My Friends. But then the explicit use of sitar is of course, George Harrison. But that's using an acoustic instrument on the rest of the instrumentation is acoustic. Brian using a sitar in the context of an electric, up-tempo, really powerful rock and roll song, that is in and of itself its own weird, powerful innovation. The song, I mean, again, I'm gonna try and keep it brief. I mean, the song, it's one of the greatest songs ever. Mixed lyrics are incredible, mixed vocal performance. I mean, that is a dark horror movie performance, and he stays just on the right side of not being hammy or chewing the scenery. It's dark, it's believable, there is a weird, eerie, angry energy to it, and Keith's guitar parts off of the sitar, the fact that instead of weaving guitars, they're weaving a sitar and an electric guitar, absolutely brilliant. And then you have an absolutely commanding drum performance, a lifetime, like a kind of a once in a lifetime, except not because it's Charlie Watts, but for anybody else, it would be a once in a lifetime drum performance. Incredible drum performance. Again, there's a thing I want to talk about with Charlie that I will talk about later, where I kind of do my little salute to the greatness of Charlie Watts. But what Charlie does best at the Stones is on full display here. And then there's that weird outro where it goes into like that sort of doomed march, and it's the backing vocals, and that's really eerie and weird, and again, dark, and really dark for 1966. That is weird stuff, and just a remarkable single, and in its own way, as forward-thinking as Paperback Writer, or what the Kinks were doing, or what the Yardbirds were doing, or what Phil was kind of reaching his apotheosis at that point with River Deep Mountain High, and about to check out, and then you have Brian with Good Vibrations. So I mean, the Stones are right in there, both in terms of content and production and performance. Just incredible. And again, Bill is amazing on, especially on the outro of another Zoom bass outro. Then the B-side, at least in England, the A-side, Stupid Girl, we'll talk about with Aftermath. I think that works as a single, but I think as the English B-side of Long Long While, which again I first would have heard here, and I do have the vinyl of that. It was given to me by my aunt. It was the first Stones thing I had? I don't remember, but it was one of the very first things I had, and I don't know why I don't see it in here. It's weird that I can't find it. At any rate, Long Long While, like I said, I discovered it without context on More Hot Rocks, and it is also on the singles collection. This is indispensable. I'm a really big fan of this compilation. if you're a fan of the Stones, I don't know why you'd screw around with other compilations when you could get this one. I just have incredible sentimental attachment to this, partially because I think the sequencing is so good, and I just love it, almost as a standalone album in its own weird way. But this is, I mean, you cannot beat this. This is just absolutely the best. Anyway, Long While, the first time I heard it, which was, like I said, devoid of context on More Hot Rocks, it's almost an Otis Redding ballad. It could be a country ballad. It's the Stones really blending genres, and writing kind of more within a genre framework. Mix really like with 19th Nervous Breakdown and Paint It Black and Mother's Little Helper, which is also a single that comes out in this period, but we'll talk about in the context of Aftermath. These are powerful, dark songs that have a lot of societal critique. I guess you could consider them political or topical songs in a way. That you could consider them as sort of abstract pop art protest songs. And not overtly political, like they're not talking about Vietnam, but they are these kind of bullish, confident attacks on society. So Long While, and that's been their songwriting voice now. I mean, that's really, I think, one of the key aspects of the Pop Heathens period. Long While is like the opposite of that. They just go and write this classic relationship song. This very earnest, I'm gonna get you back song, but like pleading and emotional. And I Mick sings it unbelievably, like, and that galloping, or I guess it's not stride piano, because that's a different genre. I guess sort of galloping piano. It's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of classicist songwriting at a time where they weren't really bothering with that too much, and the fact that they were able to write something that has that much emotional heft to it, and then Mick's singing of it. It's absolutely incredible. The first time I ever heard it, I would have been 12 or so. I thought it was like, my interpretation of it at that age was that it was like a cover of like a Patsy Cline ballad or something. I thought it was absolutely gorgeous. Like I got like choked up, like choked up. I thought it was just like the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Similarly, on More Hot Rocks, I had almost the exact same response to their cover of I Can't Be Satisfied. Brian's slide guitar on that is like one of my single favorite. It's like a top 5 moments in the Rolling Stones for me. Like, it's one of my favorite things that's ever been recorded. Brian, like, is, it's as good as it gets for me. But yeah, like, Long While is just this absolute gem of a song. It is a beautiful piece of work. Beautiful. And then sort of mix kind of soul, Otis Redding, sort of soul man-ish, sort of changing his mind at the end, but not this time. Like, it's just a great performance. And Keith's guitar fills at the end are beautiful. Yeah, it's the fact that that's just a B-side, that they were knocking these songs out, that speaks volumes about the genius and the power that they were harnessing. And yeah, so those are obviously from the Aftermath sessions, and we're going to get into talking about that particular album right now. All right. All right. So in April of 1966, the Rolling Stones released Aftermath. And if you people talk about, the Stones, the big four, right? I tend to think of it a little differently. I tend to think of it as December's Children, those September 65 songs, as an introduction, then Beggar's Banquet through Aftermath through Exile on Main Street, and then Goat's Head Soup is like an epilogue. So to me, it's kind of a larger story now. as I already read the sessionography there, which I'm going to link to the guy because it's like the Rolling Stones database or something. So I'm going to give credit to the guy. He doesn't like anybody stealing his stuff, so I will respect that. So see the link, see the link below. Anyway, I years ago for the car, I turned the the chess studio sessions into the Rolling Stones now, right? So along those same lines, and just made that an album, right? And I forget, I did the same thing with the first album. So anyway, I made a double album version of Aftermath. So to my mind, you sort of have the intro and epilogue, but really it's sort of bookended to my way of thinking with like 2 double albums. This is a very long record. I forget how long it is off the top of my head. It's 50 something minutes, which it's one of the longest single albums. I think this and Dylan's Desire are 2 of the longest single albums. Or no, I was going to say Miles Davis's Get Up With It, but those have like 30 odd minute album sides. So, but it's a double album, duh. But at any rate, those are 2 of the longest single albums. So I would have gotten this back in 92, spring of 92. This was the U.S. version. This was all that was available to me. I got this at this one mall that had a Music Land in it, and it was like really cool kids who like worked there. They were very affected. I always made jokes. I always said that they were Cure fans. That was my 1992 era put down of them. I was like, oh, they're Cure fans. So anyway, this is the U.S. version. U.S. version has this amazing melting face album cover, which I always thought was like the perfect visual analog for the music. I always thought it looked really modern too. I always thought it looked like one of those like I don't know, like Manchester bands or something. I always thought that it was really like super modern looking. That was my interpretation of it. Years and years and years later, and also I was befuddled by the sequence in Bill Wyman's book. The UK sequence like made no sense to me at all. Flash forward many years, and I finally got the UK copy of Aftermath, right? The early 2000s remasters. And this was even more confusing because by that point it had been a long time since I had looked at Bill Wyman's book. And I'll tell you, the notion that it ended with What to Do, which again I knew decontextualized on this. What to Do to me, to my teenage brain, sounded like an earlier song. It sounded like a 1964 song. The idea that it would close this 1966 album and this sort of foray into the more modern era of the Stones was like, that truly just made zero sense whatsoever to me. So anyway, I played this a lot. I played it in my car obsessively, and all of a sudden over time, not all of a sudden over time, that's a contradiction in terms, over the course of a few weeks, months, whatever, this became the sequence. This became the definitive sequence, and this sort of weird retrograde, I don't know, monster B-movie album cover. This became the cover to me. And this became just a cool photo of the band. This became the definitive album. Most people prefer, and in fact on the official Rolling Stones like YouTube channel, they don't have the UK sequence. They don't use this album cover. It has effectively been replaced by this. And this in the summer of 1992, that very strange summer, this album made all the sense in the world to me. This was one of the first real late night listens. The first true late night listening I had in my life was the first two Doors albums. But what Aftermath became to me was the record I would listen to after I would play, preferably Jane's Addiction. Either I used to listen to just Ritual de lo Habitual all the way through, or I would play the first two, the live album, and then Nothing Shocking, and then this was, and I would play this at a much lower volume. I had like a 9 or 10 p.m. cutoff time for volume, so I would play this really quietly, and playing it real quietly made in a weird way made even more sense to me, because it was, a lot of this felt very spooky and ethereal, and it as quiet, it was like quiet and ghostly, and this for me, even beyond this, it obviously it's a much better album than December's Children, because it's an actual album, but this even was more about youth, and the coming power of youth, and coming more into yourself, and really sort of defining what your values were, what your values weren't, what you were, you in fact rebelling, what was it that you were rebelling against. It forced you to do a lot of thinking in a good way, but also just how evocative the music was. It was, there's something about, again, there's something about when you start having early experiences, especially if, like with somebody, right? Where that, I don't know, it's like you've opened up a door to a different dimension, and like the promise of it next time, and you really feel like you're very quickly. I mean, like, I was very quickly in my life outside the morality and outside any thinking to do with my upbringing, like within a year and a half, like the ship had sailed, and I was gone, and kind of never returned in a lot of ways. And though you do have to, I suppose in life, you do have to return in some ways, and that's probably the lesson of living past your 20s and stuff. You do at some point, especially now that I am a middle-aged man, you do at some point have to reconcile all of these things. But by that point, I mean, I was starting to not see the shore any longer, and I was very excited by that. And I don't know, my memories of this album are very tied into that sort of dark, ethereal sensuality, and just all of those like amazing like late night memories, and kind of just like first experiences, staying out by yourself at night. I used to break out of my house and go for like these really weird long walks. Sometimes I would videotape them. And then I would have to like sneak back in, not wake the dog up, all that sort of crap. And to me, that and the first two Doors albums are ridiculously evocative of all of those memories. Yeah, and then stuff like Jane's Addiction, Nirvana's Bleach. There's certain records, Revolver. There's certain records that have some sort of weird dark pull to them, especially from having heard them at a really specific age. Anyway, but that has all kind of been supplanted by this. I feel like I at some point came to understand this album far more than I could this album. So anyway, shall we? Aftermath. This is the masterpiece. This is like such a ridiculous, unbelievable art statement. And You know, it's funny because I think a lot of people think of it as the counterpoint, as like the Stones' counterpoint to like Revolver. This predates Revolver, and there's the pictures of the Beatles looking at the album in the studio. Well, I think while they were recording the Paperback Writer single, I want to say, don't hold me to that. So this is actually their counterpoint to Rubber Soul. Interesting, and but kind of like Revolver, there's a similar vibe. There is a dark crackle. There is the spark of the new, the feeling of the new, the feeling of the unexplored, and the willingness to kind of just that wander out into the night, fearless, you know, and that's what this really captures. On one hand, on the other hand, and this is the other layer of it that I got later on in the 2000s, when I got really obsessed with this. This is also ancient. It's ancient music. And they sound like 1920s bluesmen. It wasn't until I'd gone through listening to, because it was because of these guys that I went through Robert Johnson and all that stuff. And it wasn't, it wasn't really until like after listening to Robert Johnson, listening to the Harry Smith collection, the anthology of American folk music, Bessie Smith, all like just going through, and obviously early rock and roll as well. But really, there's this other layer. This record plays in this whole other way, where it really does sound like 1920s bluesmen dropped into the middle of this modern world that they are all of a sudden grappling with. And in that sense, it is related to Rubber Soul, because I've always kind of seen Rubber Soul as a unconscious, or not consciously a concept album, but it's these guys, it's these men dealing with the modern woman, right? The sort of the beginning of second wave feminism and the response to the modern woman, and that's part of how I've always seen Rubber Soul, and this is sort of like that, but it's more. But this is even more so. This is people all of a sudden dropped from like the 20s into a world of televisions and the Vietnam War and sports cars and just modern communication for that time, and just attitudes and music and film and literature that they don't have any real frame of reference for, but they're sort of going directly at it, and without any a damn the torpedoes, again, what do you got kind of attitude. So to me, this winds up being a very weird, deep, cosmic, amazing fucking masterpiece, that for me works on multiple levels. Obviously, it's all written by Jagger and Richards. The fact is, after the September '65 songs, they just kept on writing. And my God, as Keith said about Mick during this period, I love his phrase. He was running the ink. I think that's how he phrased it. And he was. he really was. So anyway, and then you have Brian coming into his own as the sonic genius. Stephen, what's his name? Not Stephen Douglas. Whoever wrote the Old Gods Nearly Dead book. Stephen something, I think. He also wrote Hammer of the Gods, the Led Zeppelin book. Referred to Brian Jones as the sonic avatar, which I really like a lot. Is there any other musician ever in a band who's functioned in that way? I don't know. I can't really think of anybody. Especially since the fact that it was his band and he was the leader of the band, and as he started getting supplanted, he just created this role for himself. His role in the Stones is as unique as Brian Wilson's role in the Beach Boys, where like he doesn't tour, he doesn't, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't do promotional appearances. He just writes the music and makes the records, and most of the time is the voice. But Brian just sort of becoming this guy who creates all these musical parts, you know, that's very unique. I can't really think of any other band where somebody just sort of gives up their main instrument by and large, and just becomes, yeah, just becomes this guru of, or this, not guru, a savant of just picking up instruments and creating musical parts, and very indelible musical parts. That's wholly unique, and part of what I love about Brian, especially since he wasn't a natural songwriter, you know, and he certainly wasn't encouraged to write songs, not within the emerging dynamics of the band. So yeah, so the album begins with what became a single, Mother's Little Helper. It's another Mick assault on society, and fuzzed out guitars. It's just an amazingly well written song. It is kind of another like electrified version of Dylan. And it's just such solid songwriting. It's just, you know, it feels timeless. It also has the sort of the shock of the new to it, and it's an amazing song. And the fact that it sort of deals with the morality or anti-morality of the older generation, and just the needling of them. It's an amazing song, and Mick's lyrics are kind of perfect. Like all the details, like he gets absolutely right, and he sounds perfect. Like by this point, like his vocal tone and just how he projects himself as a singer, he knows exactly what he's doing. Like by this point, this man is truly fully in control of the instrument. So, and then we get Stupid Girl. And Stupid Girl, again, has the same kind of weird, crackle to it, you know? And I think, you know, the thing for me with Stupid Girl, you know, again, the Stones, especially, you know, but not so much now, but for 50 years now, because, you know, people forget, I mean, the second wave feminists hated the Rolling Stones. The Exile on Main Street tour was protested constantly by feminists for the Stones for being sexist. And Camille Paglia has written about that a number of times. But you know, Stupid Girl, you know, I don't know. I mean, on one hand, sure, you can call it misogynistic, sure. On the other hand, I think that myself, I do not believe that a song written about a woman is a song written about all women. I refuse to believe that. I don't think that when NWA wrote "fuck the police," they literally meant every police officer in the entire universe. Like, I think that things are written in a certain way that give power and assertion of a voice, but I refuse this sort of idea that that then it's about, you know, if I, at the same time as I was listening to this, I was a big Bikini Kill fan. I was getting into Sonic Youth. I mean, I was really into the Dirty album. Like, I didn't think that Kim Gordon literally meant every man. I didn't think that Kathleen Hanna meant me personally. Excuse me, when she sang White Boy, like, and I was a white boy. I still am, though. White middle-aged man now. But, you know, I didn't get uppity about those songs. And so, conversely, I refuse to get uppity about this. Also, I, probably like you, have known some really stupid girls. And it's funny to laugh at. And as evidenced by my Slick Rick video and some of the parts of my Black Flag videos, I love laughing at shit that you shouldn't laugh at. That's kind of the point of humor, or a certain kind of humor. I believe in that very strongly, and I don't think that means that that's what you actually mean or what your true desire is. Like I really reject all of that. I think that's nonsensical, and it's very one dimensional, and it's kind of, I just think it's anti-human. So, I've always loved Stupid Girl. I think it's far better than Neil Young's song Stupid Girl. It's it's absurd, and it is humorous to me, and it is satirical. I don't think Mick thinks that, and I don't really know people who do think like that, and the people who you come across who really are misogynistic, they don't have humor, and they don't have a sly wink. They're fucking assholes, and they're usually really dumb. And the Stones, especially Mick, are anything but dumb. They're really fucking smart. So I've never taken it on a surface level like that, and I have a good laugh at it. But then we go from maybe, if you want to call it cheap laughs, you can do that, to absolute drop dead gorgeous perfection. And I'm just gonna make sure I want to get my notes right here, so just give me 1 second. There we are. Okay, so then we go into absolute ultimate perfection, and absolute ultimate beauty, and that's, of course, Lady Jane. First of all, I have to say, one day, my grandfather had built a stereo system. My grandfather was like really, I don't know that he went beyond 8th grade, but my grandfather, in a lot of ways, was far smarter than I could ever be. He ran his own business for like decades. Like he was a brilliant guy, and but he built a goddamn stereo system. Like people, this is before entertainment centers that didn't exist. He bought all the component parts and put the whole system together. It's amazing. Anyway, but it played records, and I spent a lot of time living in my grandmother's apartment, and I was playing more Hot Rocks, and Lady Jane is on it, and my grandmother never really listened to the music I listened to, but the line, "My sweet Marie," my grandmother, whose name was Marie, I will never forget this. She just sort of lifted up her head. It was like the one time she noticed anything out of anything I was playing, and she just goes, "That's my name." And I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. We were really close, and I just have that. Like, I cannot hear the song without hearing my grandmother's voice. So there's always that. But what an absolutely incredible song! It almost sounds like Mick was writing it as a goof, as some sort of like almost like a weird send up or something, because it does feel slightly tongue-in-cheek from his perspective, but then it also sounds like he's so overcome by the beauty of the song and of the melody, and like that he gets swept up in it too. The lyrics are really interesting. They're weirdly, I guess I'll just say sensitive, evocative. It's brilliant. I guess it's like a madrigal song, but really, that middle section, what I've always called the ballet part, or the ballet section. So it's Brian on dulcimer, and is that right? Yeah, it's Brian on dulcimer and Jack Nietzsche on harpsichord. So that sort of three-way. It's what is instead of a duet, instead of a quartet, a trio? I guess a trio. That trio of Brian on dulcimer, Jack Nietzsche on harpsichord, and then Keith on acoustic guitar. That middle section is one of the most gorgeous things that I've ever heard. And I always used to picture, because where is it sequenced on? It, yeah. Just bear with me for a second. Uh, yeah, so it sequenced one song before Sitting on a Fence. And those two on More Hot Rocks. And like those two songs, I always used to hear, or I always used to see in my mind, like it's like a very overcast day, and like you're walking by some sort of like old, I don't know, cathedral or something, and there's all this like wrought iron and extremely dark green vines wound around the wrought iron. That's the sound of that to me. Like you're walking in a foreign country and it's very like foggy and overcast, and that's Lady Jane to me. It's gorgeous. That's one of the most beautiful sections of music like ever recorded by anybody. It's shockingly beautiful, and to me that's the whole point of the Stones in this era is, and even more so in some ways on the next record. There's a shocking, powerful level of beauty and expression of beauty that counteracts the cheap laughs and the nastiness, right? So that then to me makes it all that much harder to dismiss the nastiness as pure nastiness, you know? So so yeah, then we get into, and then we're back into the darkness. Brian, one of the greatest fucking musical contributions of all time. But oh my god, Brian on marimbas, fucking Under My Thumb, unbelievable. Under My Thumb, you know, people have had problems with my entire life. I was reading critiques of it literally when I was a teenager. I always loved this song. It's a joke, as my man Jack Grisham would say. It's a joke, champ. It's extremely dark humor. Do you know anybody who actually thinks like this? Like, there's this thing in the last 10 years maybe where people act like everybody prior to 10 years ago was super cool with spousal abuse or domestic violence or whatever. It was, when I was a kid, that was one of the worst things you could say about somebody. You know, it was a step up from being a murderer or a pederast. It was like that was never socially acceptable. And I was I grew up in a very conservative household and was in a very conservative world. And it was like one of the worst things you could say about somebody. So like it was never acceptable. You know, that was always awful. So the implication of that in the song, like, it's extremely dark humor. And I don't know that I've ever met anyone who actually thinks like that. To me, it's ultimate smartass. It's ultimate tongue in cheek. I just don't know how you can take it on a surface level. It's again kind of like in the Slick Rick video. It's piquant naughtiness. It's saying things you're not supposed to say and getting like a charge out of it. And that's what the song is. And, you know, I remember there was this girl who was dating a guy who I couldn't stand. And it kind of let slip that I had a crush on this girl. Somebody found out that I had a crush on this girl and told this girl. And this girl talked to me for like a week or two. And then I remember she said to me, well, she's dating this guy, but if she breaks up with him, then she'll think about dating me. And I was like, well, that's stupid. Like what the hell is that? And I remember, you know, like a few days later, I was listening to this album and Under My Thumb came on, and I was thinking about this situation and how dumb it was. And the song really made me laugh. It was that much funnier thinking about it. Like, you know, this girl is like under my thumb. Like, and of course she wasn't. And I don't know. I always remember that moment, like how dumb I felt in that whole situation. And this song, like, listening to the song was just like relief. It was funny. It was so stupid, and it helped me contextualize how dumb of a situation I was in. And also the other thing is, have you ever met anybody who, like, when this, if they talk about this song, who sympathizes with the guy? Ever? Wouldn't anybody's natural sympathies go to this poor woman who's now being made like this like sad, pathetic, cut off figure. Like, is there any like I just have a hard time believing there are people who like hear this song and go, "Ha, that's right." Like, and if they do, they already were fucked up and already had fucking problems. They already had big problems with women before this song came along. So, you know, this, I don't, you know, I tend to take the view like that with anything. Like, you know, back in my day with the Satanic Panic, the kids who shot themselves because the song said do it, like, they were going to do something at some point anyway. It had nothing to do with Judas Priest or the Ozzy thing. Like, I've always thought of that as ludicrous. This song is very, very, very dark humor, and it's played for very, very dark laughs. And, you know, I think, you know, I don't know. I think people should be able to laugh at it. I think that that's healthy, as opposed to, oh no, you know. I don't think that is a healthy response. Then we get to Don't You Bother Me. Now, when I was a younger man listening to this, there were a number of these sorts of songs on this album that I didn't really care for all that much. I didn't really get the songs. To me, they all sound, I referred to them as the halfway songs. And they didn't feel fully written, and I didn't really get them. When I was then a decade older and listening to this, holy shit, those songs transform themselves, because that's kind of what I'm talking about with the transported country, backwoods country bluesmen of the 20s dropped into the middle of the 60s. It sounded completely different to me. The songs sounded like totally like vibrant and timeless, and it sounded like sepia tone, like photographs coming to life in full color. And I absolutely love the song. I absolutely love that it's kind of open-ended, and I think it's just absolutely gorgeous and evocative of all of these different points in time simultaneously. It's masterful. And also how the lyrics are sort of general, and then all of a sudden they get really specific about the modern world and really specific about modern attitudes. And I just love that. I love how vivid the contrast is, and Mick like really springing to life. The band, again, it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like some weird hybrid of backwoods 20s country blues music, but it also sounds like, you know, it also sounds like ancient Appalachian music. It also sounds like something that could have come over from Wales or Scotland or something. Like, it's such a weird combination, and it's absolutely beautiful, and I love it. I love it. And this is totally unique songwriting. I mean, this doesn't have anything to do with the Beatles. It doesn't have anything to do with Bob Dylan. It doesn't have anything to do with Ray Davies. It doesn't have anything to do with Brian Wilson or Phil Spector. This is their own weird creative path that they're going down. And it turns out that they would continue to go down for years. And then we get to Going Home, which is the big epic. And of course, then the American version, which is, like I said, now kind of appears to be the canonical version. It's the album ender. And most people accept it as the album ender. It was a big influence on the Doors, having the sort of the bottle to go and create the end. That, well, the Stones had their big long song at the end of a record, so we're gonna have the guts to like really make ours and really stretch it out. And I always thought of it as an album ender. It wouldn't make sense as anything other than an album ender, right? Right, yeah. Except then a decade later, this happened. And I started to hear it again very, very differently. I heard it no longer as the album ender. I heard it as the album's centerpiece. And it's, you know, the fact that it's, you know, I get the perspective, and I think again, Mr. Cannistraci's analysis of it as you sort of have the album of songs and then there's this loose jam at the end. I totally get that. I completely understand that. But as the years have gone by and I've listened to this kind of exclusively, this is the album to me. To me, there's the Stones on a lyrical, you know, in a lyrical way, and in terms of their singles, doing the Marlon Brando, what do you got? We're on the fucking pirate ship. You can't do anything to us. We're here. We're brave. We're taking you. We're fucking taking you all on, right? That's the vibe of the Stones. That's the vibe of the Stones in text and in terms of their visual presentation, their dress, their affect, everything, right? But this is doing it in album form. The album form hadn't been solidified yet. We didn't have really rock albums yet. Sgt. Pepper still didn't exist. I don't know when Pet Sounds came out, but I mean, let's face it, the influence wouldn't have been, I mean, felt totally yet. This was still a singles world. So the idea of a rock album was still a fairly amorphous concept, right? So the idea of dropping a near 11-minute song, right? Who was doing 11-minute songs? John Coltrane and Bob Dylan, and that's about it. So the idea of a rock band, the premier rock band other than the Beatles, dropping an 11-minute song in the middle of the album is even more fucking revolutionary to me, and even more counterintuitive, and even more we do whatever the fuck we want. It's not just in the text, it's now in the subtext. It's because the album format doesn't exist, so they're just taking wild stabs and creating it on the fly. The idea that the song, and also the Stones didn't plan for it to be an epic. The Andrew just kept running the tape, and the band just kept playing, and Brian's absolutely beautiful harmonica playing, Bill filling out the sonic space, going up high, doing beautiful stuff up high on the bass, like just gorgeous. And again, weirdly kind of spooky and ethereal, especially for me, listening at 2 a.m. at 14, you know, with quiet volume, you know, just like it's this, you know, it's just emanating from like another time, you know, and it does, and it does sound like bluesmen playing in the modern world, run amok in the modern world. And the other thing that I love is I love that, you know, Keith is just constant, there's all these subtle tempo shifts, and it's not a big heavy drum or percussive, or it's certainly not rocking in any way. And it's so loose and it's barely hanging together. And I just love Keith throwing in these little bits and constantly changing and morphing things. But what's so cool is Mick responding to it. Mick responding to the little subtle shifts. And my favorite part of the entire thing is the when Keith starts hitting that one guitar melody and Mick immediately picks up on it and starts sha-la-la, sha-la-la. Like when he immediately goes into, like, I love all of that. It's quiet, subtle, dark night, spooky, ethereal interplay. It's beautiful. It's so cool. And it's also so, like, ultimate kind of, it's not overtly defiant. It's just defiant of we do whatever the fuck we want. And yeah, that's the centerpiece. Awesome. It's so fucking, like, I love that they did that. I love it. It's awesome. So anyway, that's how side one ends. What a fucking masterpiece of an album. What a weird ride, right? Like, twists and turns, you know? So then we flip the record over. Yes. Okay, so side two of Aftermath. Again, the kind of the spooky, teleported, time-traveling bluesman. It begins with the spooky grand piano, sounds like it's being played at the top floor of an abandoned Victorian mansion, and then it kind of almost goes into Satisfaction, and launches into a great kind of Chuck Berry-ish rock and roll song, Flight 505. Probably Mick's most overt kind of Ray Davies character study, very similar to like Holiday in Waikiki or one of those, or Most Exclusive Residence for Sale or one of those kinds of songs. Except Mick's character development, he just jumps around and fucks around with it in like a really funny, like I love the flippancy of it. Like suddenly this was not my life. So he just gets on the plane and like it doesn't take much for this guy like to have delusions of grandeur, like for no apparent reason. So the like feeling like a king, of course I'll have a drink, and then of course they die. Like the plane goes down in the sea, and that's it. Like song over, and it's just I love the song. I've always loved it. I love the dark humor of it. Mick really does a lot of persona jumping, especially as the album goes on. And I mean, which Mick is the real Mick? Is it the guy who's yearning for his girl going home? Is it the black-hearted guy of Under My Thumb? The ultimate like narcissist of Under My Thumb? Is it this weird doof in Flight 505? Like who's You have to take these things as character studies. You have to take these things as pieces of method acting. You cannot take these things as flat, linear statements, And Flight 505 is just, I love it. It's so dark and weird. And then we go back to the time-traveling bluesman with what I would have thought as a teenager is one of the halfway songs, High and Dry. I love this song. It's like somewhere between like a oompa, like it's ancient European music, but it's also like blues music and like country blues. Like it's such, they go into such a weird place. They go into such weird places on this record. Brian playing beautiful harmonica. That is him. Yep. Just magnificent. And, again, Mick's method acting, like, here he is as this, like, I don't know, like, 1890s con man, like, riding the rails, and, this ne'er-do-well con man, and the woman, sees right through it, and he's, to use a phrase I used to use a lot back, he's sort of fucked, sucked, and forgotten, and kind of trying to figure out like how he'll get the best of the next one. Like it's such weird subject matter, but cool subject matter, and it's the opposite of Under My Thumb. He's the turnabout is very much fair play, and the hunter gets captured by the game, and so it's again darkly funny the same way Under My Thumb or Stupid Girl is darkly funny, except now he's the butt of the joke, and again the music is just it's such like a weird combination of Civil War music, or again Appalachia and the 20s and the 60s. It's just amazing. It is no pun intended. It is out of time, as this entire album is. It's just such a fucking masterpiece. And then the next song, speaking of out of time, oh my god. So, what's the better marimba part? Under My Thumb or Out of Time? Brian doing ultimate Brian. I mean, my god, that, I know he didn't like write the melody, but Jesus Christ, that is this is a guy who hadn't played marimbas before, and these are like two of the greatest marimba parts ever. Like, his playing is so awesome, and then that song, I originally would have known it from this, where it has the tighter edit, and I'll be honest, I didn't really initially like the longer version. I didn't know that it was an edit, And so when I first heard this, I was like, what the fuck? But I have grown to love the longer, looser version because kind of in the same way that I had to get on the wavelength of Going Home being at the center of the album, and this kind of loose, casual, again, we do whatever the fuck we want. You're just along for the ride. You're riding on the pirate ship with us for a while, you know? And Out of Time, but the edit version, it's such a tight, perfect, could have been Motown song. It is just absolutely incredible. Like, you could hear the Four Tops doing this. Like, it's so, or maybe even the Temptations. Like, it is so absolutely fantastic just as a song. And Mick is, I mean, the lyrics, man, are brutal. And in a weird way, to me, this is far more brutal than Under My Thumb, because Under My Thumb is jokes and play acting and fucking around. Out of Time is brutal. When he you know, there's a lot of songs of people, you know, sharp talking, putting people down out there, right? But like, you know, in rap, I mean, there's the whole phenomenon of diss tracks. Mick does more with one word. He levels one word that is just devastating when he says, "You're obsolete." Like, what? Like, obsolete. Like, that is just brutal. And the fact that it's just supported by the beautiful, beautiful work that the rhythm section is doing, the beautiful, like, great backing harmonies. And again, to repeat the point, the marimba, Brian is kind of my favorite Rolling Stone. That's my man. And just, you know, it is just such an amazing song. And like I said, I have come to appreciate the unedited version. And that it just keeps going and it just keeps kind of rolling along on this crazy, weird, loose record. It's just an absolute masterpiece of a song. It's a beautiful, it's a piece of beauty. It's also a piece of nastiness at the same time. So it's sort of, you know, fusing kind of the instincts of the album into one song, and it's just it's one of my favorite things that they ever recorded. Quite simply, one of the things that's really interesting about this album is that the rockers. There's not necessarily a lot of full on rocking on this album. Flight 505 does, but there's not. It's not musically that aggressive of an album. Yet the whole thing feels aggressive and dark and electric in its own way. And even though the rock songs aren't necessarily the major standouts of the album, they're still amazing. And It's Not Easy is the next song, and again, as a teenager, I would have kind of thought of this as one of the halfway songs, but it's still a song that I really love, and you know, it's thoughtful in a way that some of the songs aren't, and reflective, and I think that it's actually a pretty earnest piece of writing from Mick. Kind of looking around at his peer group and, you know, just sort of wondering, asking pertinent questions, which we will get to in a few songs from now. But it's maybe not one of the major songs, but I love it, and it is a great song. Just honestly dealing with maturing. And then we get to one of the absolute, like, staggering high points of the record. We get to I Am Waiting, a song about, you know, a song about anxiety, a song about, again, growing older, a song about feeling out of place, feeling out of time. It's almost like the girl that got leveled in Out of Time. This is like the song of comfort to her. This song was used to just absolutely ridiculously perfect effect in Rushmore. again, I would have kind of initially thought of this as one of the halfway songs, but it is one of the songs that grew on me. I think it is one of their great major masterpieces. When it breaks into, I don't even, it's not really the chorus, the sort of the B section, the "Oh yes, you will find out." That is absolutely perfect. I mean, these guys really are playing as one. It is a, it's one of the loveliest things that I've ever heard. And Brian is playing the dulcimer on it, and just that it's so plaintive and I guess just evocative and beautiful, and the vocal harmonies, just everything about it's a completely unique song. I mean, there aren't songs that sound like this. The only thing I could maybe kind of sort of point to is the sort of firelit, trying to find comfort in an uncertain world tone of "We Can Work It Out." I mean, that's like the only thing I can kind of connect it to. Just stunning. Like, what a masterpiece of a song. And again, this adds so much depth to there. There were so many people who tried to cop the Stones' Trip, and ultimately they failed because they tried to make it all about attitude all the time and being the human riff or whatever. And the reason people could never really cop the Stones' Trip, and I feel like kind of more than anybody, even more than the Beatles or more than Dylan, I kind of feel like the music industry really threw a lot of its resources in the 70s and 80s into trying to have a next Rolling Stones. And nobody really did it. I suppose Aerosmith would have come the closest, but and not, I'm not in any way putting 70s Aerosmith down, but even 70s Aerosmith, I mean, like something like this, like nobody would have written this. Like none of the power pop bands who were supposed to be the next Beatles, there are just certain songs that were way way beyond the reach of the music industry blessed, like, next in line, and this is just an example of that. Who else could write this, and who else could think to write this? Absolutely gorgeous, just a stunning, beautiful, weirdly calming, comforting song. But it's also really honest, and it's not pulling any punches, and it still speaks. It speaks very straight with you and very straight to you, and it's so it's the kind of song you really can count on in life, right? And grows with you. And then we get Take It or Leave It. Mick is sort of back into. Oh, that's the other thing I just to say about I Am Waiting. Again, the time travel. This could be a song. I mean, this could be a song from the Elizabethan period. Like that melody could be. It could be a Welsh child ballad. I mean, you can hear it in so many different contexts. It could have been something played by Jelly Roll Morton. It's the Stones are in such a unique place at this point. So anyway, Take It or Leave It is a lovely ballad, really lovely. And yes, Brian on harpsichord and bells, beautiful ballad, and Mick is the one who is Mick is the one who's being played by the girl, and kind of responding in semi-melodramatic, but really it's melodramatic on the surface. It's resigned. He knows he's been played for a fool, and just like all the other method acting, it works. This one does not feel out of time in the way that I Am Waiting or High and Dry or some of the other songs do. This really does feel like it's taking place. Like you can see, like you could see this as like a scene in a Godard movie. You could see this in like a then modern high rise with like period appropriate furniture and like the girls in like a mini dress. Like you can see it, and it's just it's the sheer sort of scale or range of what the band is able to play, and then the range of songs that Mick and Keith are coming up with. I mean, this is just incredible, and this is their first fully self-written album, right? Unbelievable. Then there's Think, which has brass on it, and I've always liked this song. I've always thought it's really cool. There's Keith does some really nice guitar stuff on it. It's one of the lesser songs, but again, it kind of like It's Not Easy. It's just an honest sort of assessment of where this group of people are at. This friend group or group of colleagues, whatever. It's just and it's honest and serious, and Mick even says like you say I lack maturity, like so it's it's a beautifully self-aware song, and again highlights the fact that you cannot take some of the other dark humor stuff on a surface level, and that you are foolish if you do. And then we get to the song that I talked about before, that back when I heard it here, I thought was more from the sort of Under the Boardwalk, Poison Ivy kind of era of the band. What to Do. The idea that it was from '66 was very weird. The idea that it's from the same recording sessions that birthed Out of Time and Mother's Little Helper and Lady Jane seems totally anachronistic. But the thing is, the Stones are operating on such a multiplicity of levels on this album that I am willing to they've more than won over the benefit of the doubt. And I think that the album is written kind of in the same way that Long Long While is this sort of classicist, like kind of country ballad, like that's just sturdy as all get out. I think that this is written this way in a really specific way. And Mick, it's interesting, in the 25 by 5 documentary, Mick talked about that it was hard for people who he had gone to school with, like as the Stones were emerging and were becoming more countercultural outlaws, that it was hard to relate to, but also for like friends that had gone to school with him to relate to him, and that he hated the divisions that had been caused by the fame, and but that it was also just hard to watch your friends, as he put it, struggling to climb the ladder at a bank somewhere. And while you are affluent and newly affluent and having all these wild experiences. And I always thought that was really interesting. And with all the play acting on this album, I mean, you think about the other 1966 albums. Bob Dylan goes into a whole other universe at the end with Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, right? I mean, it's almost that whole album, but especially that song. I mean, that's almost like a whole new genre of music. The Beatles go off into the other side of consciousness with fucking Tomorrow Never Knows. The Brian Wilson goes into like sort of ultimate sort of orchestrated beauty with Caroline. No, these are like our big major statements. What I find so absolutely fucking fascinating, and why this became the definitive sequence to me, and why I had to sort of get over my own thinking, is because I think What to Do is the perfect like auteur genius fucking ending of this album, because it's not a major statement. It ends with What to Do. It ends with Mick, with all the play acting and all the different personas and all the different roles. It ends with Mick inhabiting the one of these friends of his who's working in a bank. You know, television used to go off at midnight in England. They only had whatever 2 or 3 channels, and when the TV stops, you know, faded out on the epilogue. Faded out on the epilogue is like one of my favorite lyrics. That's, to me, the key to the entire album. I don't necessarily want to say that this is a concept album, but it kind of is, because the album sort of ends, and what to do is like what's playing with the credits rolling, like what to do, like it ends with a shrug. It ends with them all kind of looking at each other. They've taken on all these personas and all these attitudes, and they've been outlaws. They've been caring. They've been nasty. They've been time traveling, and now they're just people living in an apartment somewhere. Kind of young people going, well, what the hell do we do? Like, yes, you can drink and dance till 4 o'clock, but then what? Like, that's what you make your money for? Like, it's a devastating statement. Like, nowhere to go, like nothing to do, like talking to people that you don't know. Like, it's a staggering, beautiful, because it's just so real statement. It's real people with real life, and that's always what I thought was cool about Ray Davies. As people were getting more and more frenetic about the counterculture, I always loved that he wrote about like real people and real situations, and Mick makes it even more real because he puts himself in the position of this person who's young and uncertain, you know, and you know, his parents' generation had to deal with the Blitz and had to go, you know, truly fight the bad guys. And well, what the fuck are we doing? What is this? What is this world? You know, it's an amazing album closing statement, and the fact that it's couched in this sort of rollicking, sort of R&B, not really quite Motown, but kind of Brill building ish R&B song, is just, it's like the perfect musical setting. You know, as the credits roll and the guy is just he just doesn't know what the hell to do. I admire it to the nth degree that is how they chose to finish this album. What a cool, weird statement as the credits roll. What an auteur statement to really, like I said, these albums kind of from here on out really play like films or novels, and it just gives you so much to think about. And again, kind of in the 2000s, in the 2010s, during the divorce period, this was an ultimate, you know, when you're driving home from the girl, the one night stand, when you're driving home from therapy, when you're driving or whatever, or sitting up late into the night, you know, you've fallen asleep in front of the TV 2 times already, and you still somehow can't convince yourself to go to bed, but you still have work in the morning, and you're just sitting around in your empty apartment going, I really don't know what to do. That is like such an ultimate statement. I really don't know what to do. And the Stones deal with it honestly. They go straight at it. And you have to respect and love the hell out of that. This is a fucking masterpiece. Jesus Christ, they were good. I will also throw in, and we'll wrap this very long video up, idiot me. I totally thought I was going to get us up to Satanic Majesties in this video. Can you imagine how stupid that was? Ho, ho, ho. Boy, is my face red. Anyway, we will briefly touch upon the 2 songs that were not included on this album. This is Flowers. Again, I used to have a really beat up version of this, but I think it was so beat up, I think I dealt away with it somehow. But this is Flowers. This is the cash-in compilation that is mostly comprised of the British versions of Between the Buttons and Aftermath. Patti Smith in the early 70s talked about this album and what a fan of it she was. She has a great line about it. She says it was for lovers and loners only. and I have been both, and I'm more one than the other now. But you know, even then, it all remains within. So, you know, though being a lover is infinitely better than being a loner, especially when you're definitely not a fighter. So anyway, the two songs on here on this glorious compilation, which I have listened to far too many times because it's ridiculous. I have these songs, I have these songs here and here and here and elsewhere. It's really stupid that I own this, but God damn it, I love it. I don't care. I don't care that it's stupid that I have this. So the first is Ride On Baby. It's Brian on harpsichord and auto harp. Again, creating beautiful parts, beautiful musical parts, adding beautiful musical depth. And I don't know why they wouldn't have put this on the album. It is an incredible. I think it's a far more precise and far more powerful statement than Think, for instance. I mean, I love Think. I'm not putting that down. But in my version of this being a double album, this is absolutely on that. I'll tell you. It's a pre Stooges. Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell, except I would say more sort of poetically phrased, and the melodic beauty, the sturdiness of the songwriting, and the melodic beauty. The dimensions added by Brian's harpsichord playing, absolutely gorgeous. It is a great, and the use of the auto harp, but like it is a stunning, gorgeous song that still is. It's like a new kind of rock and roll because it's not like Chuck Berry, or it's not like heavy guitars or super pounding drums, but and there's really cool percussion on it. It is a magnificent song, and the lyrics are remarkably straightforward and to the point, and lacking in ambiguity in a way that a lot of 1960s lyrics weren't, in terms of implying drug usage and other things and other vices. And it is just a fantastic song. Again, Mick and Keith operating at a ridiculously high level, and how prolific were these guys? They're just churning these songs out, running the ink. And then we get to, and I first became familiar with the next song, this glorious song on here. My little 12-year-old self just was absolutely, utterly knocked out by Sitting on a Fence. Back to the Lady Jane thing, which, I mean, these two songs are next to each other on here. And again, the wrought iron with the dark, deep green vines wrapped around and walking past, it's a university or a cathedral or something, and it's that sound. It's ancient. Again, it's Appalachian. It's from the Welsh Child Ballads. It's Scottish. It's obviously the Stones are always going to be based in Black American root music as well. The sound, it's the best recorded sound because it's acoustic guitars and because there's really not much else on it. Jack Nietzsche, I think, plays some brief harpsichord in the bridge, but because it's such a stark recording, you hear Brian and you hear Keith and you hear their two distinctive parts and how utterly perfectly complementary they are. And it is, to me, the single best example of what Keith calls the ancient art of weaving, but what he talked about as being the kind of original, what they tried to get back to ostensibly with Ron when they got Ron Wood back in the band, or when they got Ron Wood in the band. But the idea that the two guitar players would be, it wasn't just going to be lead and rhythm, that it was going to be these interlocking, interweaving parts that were going to complement each other. And because the recording is so stark, you hear Brian, you hear Keith, and every single fucking note they are playing is essential. There is not a single wasted step or movement of the fingers. Like, what they do here is truly, it is for the ages. It is like, to me, it's like what they're playing on their guitars is like the fucking music of heaven. It really is. It is like celestial to me. And on top of that, it's just, again, it's so perfect and so weirdly ancient. It stirs something in my DNA that is beyond my level of understanding. And then you have Mick coming in over the top of it, kind of snide, but again, real. This is very much in line with What to Do. I've always, especially back then, I used to think, when I was a teenager, I used to think, if they make a movie out of my life, this has got to be the song that plays at the end. Like, this has got to be like, as there's one last tracking shot, like, this song has got to come up, you know? But just that, like, being 14 years old, and since I was young, I've been very hard to please, and I don't know wrong from right. And there's one thing I could never understand, some of the sick things that a girl does to a man. So I'm just sitting on a fence. You could say I've got no sense, but you know that you do. And you're working things out, you're figuring things out, and it is just such a perfect encapsulation of, again, of What to Do. It is a perfect articulation. I think that if this were to be a double album, What to Do would maybe be the last song. Maybe you could use, Going Home as a disc ender, as a side ender, of course, but as a parallel mirror, Sitting on a Fence would have to be a side ender as well, or they'd have to be, one would have to maybe begin disc 2 and then end disc 2. I don't know. And then that second verse of my friends from school grew up and settled down. The only other song that I feel like speaks this brutally and directly, but also perfectly, because there is kind of a que sera, sera, what the hell vibe to it, and there is a sense of humor to it, and the only other song I can think of that sort of feels like this, is where it's speaking that directly into someone's brain, is Neil Young's Barstool Blues. It's the only other thing that I could compare it to. It's just one of my favorite songs of all time. I love it, and just there's so much, again, just like with Lady Jane or with I Am Waiting. There's so much emotional warmth for guys who are cold and, as Robert Christgau once said, never convinced of anything. There is this weird emotional warmth where they do sort of pull together, and I don't know. It's really, there's something really, really beautiful about it. There's something always, in a great way, shocking about when these nasty, snotty little bastards are all of a sudden filled with emotional warmth and understanding. It's just a shocking thing. You expect it from Paul McCartney. You don't expect it from these guys. And yet there it appears, and you find out. So, but just that middle section where Keith and Brian are just playing over each other, that's one of my favorite pieces of music. Like, in all these records and all the, like, this is some of my favorite passages of music, just ever, by anybody, is that song. And and then just that little end, that little sort of coda, the dun 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 dun, where they just get their little final motions, and it's just perfect. It's sublime. Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So that's it. That's it for this video. I have talked a lot. Jesus Christ. I try to make these things short. I really try. I really do. I talk really so I don't know. I have a lot to say about these things. So I really wish I could cut it down. I'm sorry. Anyway, So to, I hope that you've enjoyed this. There will be a part 2 where we talk about Between the Buttons and Their Satanic Majesty's Request, the end of the Pop Heathens era. And we'll get into that in the next video. And yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed this, and thank you for watching. And God bless the 52 of you who watch these things and have subscribed. If you like this and you're new to this, please subscribe, hit the thumbs up, comment, get the algorithm moving. It is greatly appreciated. And yeah, so we'll be back next time with the rest of this. Good Lord, I can't believe this has taken as long as it has. So anyway, I'm going to wrap things up. Thanks again. See you next time. Bye!